coming, everybody. I'm Peter Allen. I am responsible for Agoda Outside, which is our public affairs division. And we are very, very pleased to have you here. This is designed to be quite an informal day, focused on interaction, so don't be shy about asking questions, meeting people, and so on. Just to run over the program for a moment before we start, so we'll have about an hour. First welcomes by our CEO, John Brown, CTO, Jochen Seidman. Then about an hour of panel discussions, followed by about an hour of what we're calling our Knowledge Cafe, which will be over there. And then we'll get together briefly, and then we will have our interactive food drink networking session. So that's the plan for the day. I'm not going to talk a lot. I'm going to hand things over to John first to welcome you.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here to our office. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. One preliminary comment I have to say is that of all the people from Agoda here at this session, I asked all of them a couple of days ago exactly what is artificial intelligence. And nobody could really give me an answer, actually. Or I got a bunch of different answers. So I would say that maybe one of the things we come out from this with is some understanding of what it is and what it isn't, because it's certainly a term that's used pretty often. I just want to say one thing briefly. I used to work at Boston Consulting Group, and one of my old colleagues there, Philip Evans, made an interesting point which I think is worth mentioning here. He, and everybody knows I like literature, so I'll digress just for 1 minute, but he always talked about a story by Borges, the old Argentinian writer. And he's got a story which is one paragraph long about a civilization somewhere, presumably in South America, 400 years ago. And they got really into cartography, right? The making of maps. And so they made a map and they weren't satisfied, so they threw it out and they made another map. And they still weren't satisfied and they made 5 more maps. And finally, they made a map and they said, this is the map that we want. This is the final map that satisfies all of us. And it said that the legend in the scale was 1 mile equals 1 mile. So, and then they began to realize how silly such a map really would be, because it doesn't really give you any additional information. It's a copy of the physical world. But I think that's interesting, because if you look at what we're doing today, we're actually in many ways doing exactly that same thing. So if you look at like the 5 most valuable companies in the world, 3 of them begin with A. You have Amazon, you've got Apple, you've got Alphabet, which is Google, you've got Microsoft and Facebook. But if you just look at Google, that's kind of what they did. They began by saying, we will take the entire digital world at that time, aka the internet, and we will scrape the entire thing and replicate it over here on the server. So they really made a one-to-one map of that digital world. And now they're even more ostentatiously or audaciously doing that with the physical world, every single street. And now Facebook, literally every single social interaction, they really have a map of literally all of the relationships on the planet, which is mind-boggling. Where Amazon is a store, not with some selection of things, but really almost everything. So I would say that that one-to-one map is kind of really what we're doing today with all of this mapping of the physical world and the digital world. So then you say to yourself, well, then that's got to be totally useless, right? Like, how can you ever cope with all of that data? How can you ever get any insight? And I feel like finally, in the last 4 to 5 years, as AI has been talked about, it finally is doing exactly that. It's saying, in the same way that a human has to make sense out of an overwhelming input of data day by day, they can't possibly look at all of it. They have to learn how to interpolate. So these machines now are beginning to do the same thing, so that world of every single social interaction becomes meaningful at the right time for you. And same thing with Google, and same thing with Amazon. So all I would say is that I love that story, because it really does, from a long time ago, kind of capture exactly what I think on some level is happening today. And given that of the biggest 5 companies in the world, they're all focusing on this, we know with 100% certainty that the day of AI is here, and it's only racing further and further and faster ahead. We might not all agree on what the definition is, and in fact I'm still hoping to learn that myself, but whatever that definition is happening, and it's happening now. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, John, and thank you everybody for joining here. So, my name is John Zeitman. I'm the CTO. I'm with Agoda for the last 6 years, and it's been a really, really interesting journey. When I joined 6 years ago, we actually didn't have any AI in Agoda. I did a little bit of AI before, but in Agoda it really didn't exist. And the progress and the things that happened in the last 6 years in this area is really, really amazing. And really, really changed the company, the customer experience. When customer comes to the website. You know, about a week ago, I just read an article about the new fastest supercomputer that was developed in the US called Supreme. And I find it amazing. You know, this computer, every time I read an article about a computer like that, but this one is just interesting and shocking because when you read about it, this computer in 1 second can do what the whole 7 billion people in the world today can do in almost 1 year. Think about it, that's shocking. In 1 second, it can calculate when whole humanity can do in almost 1 year of work. And that really made me realize why we shouldn't try to crunch the data ourselves, because we can't compete the computer. Right? That they can do much better jobs than us and can get to a better conclusions and give better insights. Based on data than what humans can do today. You know, in Agoda we store a lot of data. We store about 30 petabytes of data for data, which is quite a bit of data. And that's a really important point because you know you can have very strong computers, you can have great data scientists, but if you don't have enough data, these things, the computers and the people cannot do anything with that and cannot get to insight. So one very important side of AI is to collect a lot of data. Collect whatever you can, and then even if you don't know what you're going to do with it today, you'll find what to do with that tomorrow. And of course today, when you collect a lot of data, you need to protect it. As privacy becoming a bigger and bigger issue, we see this happening from some companies. We're taking a very conservative approach towards that. Luckily, we don't advertise on our platform, so we don't need to share any of this data with third parties. And I think it's very important to protect the data in the right way, definitely today more than ever before. And in Agoda we have about 30 data scientists. A lot of companies talk about data science and stuff like that, and they call anyone that deals with data and data science. We do a differentiation between data analysts and data scientists. Data scientists for us is the guys that have the PhD in math or in statistics and really go and research the data, build new mathematical algorithms in order to deal with the data. And in Agoda today, they are involved almost everywhere. Before this conference, we're thinking, what are they doing? What are they optimizing? And it was shocking to think about it, right? We are optimizing marketing, we are optimizing the user experience, and we're giving the best hotels for the customers. We're even optimizing customer support and supply. Almost everything we're doing is based on AI. And the thing is that's the difference between a good company to a great company. It's not the only thing that you should do, of course. If the rest doesn't work, AI will excel you. But without doing good AI today, it's very hard to be one of the great companies today. And in the consolidating world of today, when a lot of companies acquiring other companies, if you're not great, it's very hard to survive. So being very strong there, it's something very, very important. Just last interesting insight that we've been discussing. In my past 20 years of experience in engineering, I could always go to my guys and ask them, hey, why did the platform behave like that? Something happened, right? I was shown a certain hotel, and I could always go to my guys down here and tell them, hey, tell me why this hotel is in the second place in the ranking. And it was sometimes easy answer, sometimes complex, sometimes you'll go to the code and you will tell me, hey, look at this line of code, this is exactly why, or the database ranking was number 2, and there was an easy explanation. What's happening today is that once we go into deep learning, into neural networks and stuff like that, sometimes we can't explain why it happened, which is really, really, I don't know if it's scary or interesting. Today, sometimes computers take decisions that we can't explain with AI. And I find it really, really interesting. One way to explain it is they are taking decisions for us, and another way to look at it, it's like intuition. right? When I get a lot of data into my head, sometimes I know the decision right away. What should it be? But I can't really explain all the process that went into my head in order to get there. So, I'll leave you with this interesting question. Is it something scary that computers starting to do things, or is it just like intuition? But we all agree that AI is very, very important today. And for that, thank you very much, and I'll hand it to Peter to go to the next event.
We'll make one observation and then I'll invite the panel, which is I'm an Agoda employee, but I'm also an Agoda customer, of course. And what I notice is that the use of AI is very subtle. It's not as though things are reaching out. It's more that my user experience just gets quietly better. And I know that one of the things we're trying to do is help people who come to our site find exactly what they need as quickly and easily as possible, and then go on about their business. And I think this is an excellent model for AI. It's just making things better. You may not even notice. But we have lots of questions. So let me invite you gentlemen to take a seat in the front row, and our panelists to come up and join us, please. So we have a very distinguished group of folks up here, and I am going to ask each of them first. I told everybody no slides. This is not a formal lecture, but I did want to start by helping you understand a little bit about the people we have here and their companies and what they do. So the first question is kind of in order. Just please introduce yourself. Talk about, for a few minutes, your company and what the role of AI is there. And they're all wired for sound, so if you can hear, say something a little adjust it.
Let's see. Anyway, I'm Conway from Grab. So first of all, thank you very much for having me today. I think in my personal capacity, this is probably the fourth time I'm speaking in this. And I'll explain why. So I joined Grab back in 2016 as the data science bracket, machine learning bracket. And at that time, we didn't have any data science, we didn't have any machine learning. And talking motion was, hey, this bit of machine learning to do great things. All right, so it has been 3 years, and the reason why we have not been speaking much about our data science and machine learning work outside of Grab was because we had a very slow start. It took us a long time, 3 years in technology is a long time to get us here. And I was saying, at the time people were thinking, hey, with machine learning and data science, right? Just turn it on and you make money. But that's not really what it is. And so when I arrived at Grab, I very quickly realized that, hey, a lot of problems that we face are not really machine learning related. Right? A lot of the bread and butter problems are really transform problems. And so that was why I very quickly transformed the team into just data science, right, without the parentheses and machine learning. Although machine learning is still one of the teams in data science. So in this space that we're operating in, like I say, it's very much transport oriented. And so that's why in data science, we have a lot of people from mathematics, from operations research, from statistics, engineering, from all kinds of disciplines. We even have people from biology, physics, and even behavioral economics and stuff like this. So it's not really limited to machine learning and data science. But in recent years, the hype is back again. And as we grew, we also begin to realize that with all the models and algorithms that we have in production today, right, we cannot be sustainable if we keep running the regression and re-estimating the models. And we have to overlay these models with machine learning, right? They have to be on their own. And that's why we are reinvesting into machine learning today. So today we have I still consider our team small, probably about 40 people in the team, and we work on various modelings and algorithms to drive our business metrics like GMV, allocation rates, and stuff like this. The science like that? In a nutshell.
Let me pull out just two observations. One is, I think, and for those of you who are thinking like, how do we get started, and this would be a theme we'll come back to today, you have to get the basics in place first. That's a theme I consistently hear. And then the other one, which we've already heard from Agoda, is that there is a point where you have to let the machines take over, and that you can no longer effectively manage them. And this is a theme that I think we'll come back to again, because it is a little bit nerve-wracking for those of us who happen to be human. All right, we're done.
Alright, hi. My name is Idan. I'm from Agoda. I've been with Agoda for a bit more than 4 years now. And before that, I had a small startup company, which was around machine learning for marketing optimization. When we started that company, we had no idea what machine learning is, but it sounded like something we should be doing. So that's what we did. And when Agoda started into this big data and machine learning, that was around 5 years ago, so it matched quite nicely. So coming into this company, seeing the start of a transition into this new world, it's been a real journey from basically nothing to where we are today. And I think that it's like a phased evolution, right? You cannot expect to start tomorrow morning, open up 100 projects in machine learning. And it's been really nice to see this growth within our company. So when we started with what was easy to explain what we're doing and makes a lot of sense, right? So as an example, the first project we had was about marketing spend and how you bid on Google. Without going into too many details, you have to make around millions and millions of decisions, small decisions that should come up to something successful. Obviously, a person cannot do that. So in that case, we had a very good case why we need some machine learning, right? And that project went on, but as we were doing that, we also built infrastructure and framework to extend those ideas to other places where it doesn't necessarily as easy to communicate and to measure, right? But today, after 5 years from the starting point, we have around 20 projects running. And every one of those is tested, and every change we make, we see the benefit and we see the extra value that it brings to the company. And I think now we're kind of now our step on evolution is how to make data science for everyone. We don't want to say, we have this amount of people doing data science and then the others do other things. We want to have data science as part of everything we do. And we want to empower everyone we have to be able to use these. So very exciting to be at this step as well. Even though we're running this marathon for a long time, it's still challenging to see how we transform ourselves to the next level where everybody can do these things across all different parts of the product.
So again, if I'm going to pick out two themes, one is test, and this is really a part of what we call our Agoda DNA, which is to try things out, figure out what works, use data, and then advance from there. And of course, very often the tests do not work, right? That's one of the things you can send up. The longer we're in business, the more we're by and large doing things right, and so attempts to improve will often not fail because we're already doing fairly well. But this is the way to get better and better. And then integration. I was talking about making sure that data science and machine learning, AI, are not kind of isolated, but rather integrated throughout all the work we do. Good. Move on to William.
Hello, my name is William. I'm representing AI Singapore. Thanks for having me. So AI Singapore is a national program. I think the goal is really to make Singapore an AI leader. How do we do that? Well, we work with industry. We train the local talents. We work with the universities to promote more innovations in AI. My team is the industry innovation team. There, we actually take problem statements from companies and then we matchmake them with some scientists, AI scientists from the university or business institutes. On our side, we provide co-funding. On our side, we help them bring the talent pool. We train some people what we call AI apprentices. And my team also helps a little bit on the engineering side. We also have another pillar, which is called the Grand Challenge. We look at problems that affect society at national level. For example, I think just a couple of weeks ago, we announced the first Grand Challenge to bring down the 3 H's in Singapore: high cholesterol, hypertension, and this one I always have a difficulty. Diabetes, hypoglycemia, something like that, right? So we try to see how over the next 5 years we work with industry and the authority body to sort of like bring down these issues. So in a nutshell, that's me at Singapore. Prior to Singapore, I was I always loved that. I'm actually a tech team. I also love doing people and saying things. That's actually my background.
Thanks, William. And AI Singapore is specifically designed by the government to work with small to medium companies. So, and big companies as well. Okay. Right. Let's not leave out big companies. So during the next section, if this is something you're interested in, look out for William and have a chat with him. It's really part of why we're bringing everybody together, is to create opportunities and make things happen. Anmol.
Hi everyone. My name is Anmol. I'm the business director for VSense. Firstly, thank you for having me and putting up a good show together. We have a good set of people here. At VSense, we focus on AI-powered visual recognition solutions. We largely focus on e-commerce as the industry. Our aim is to connect people to products using visual content. An example of that would be using visual search when you're on e-commerce platforms. So some of our clients could be ASOS, H&M, Uniqlo, Agoda, and so forth. There was always an inherent gap of between the product inspiration and discovery. When you went on an app or a website, you would have to try and explain the product in keywords. It's okay if it's an iPhone 10 or a book that you want, but it's not quite okay when you're looking for apparel and home decor products. So visual recognition basically understands what's within the image and then matches it to what is in the database and produces a bit more of a personalized shopping experience. That's one of the solutions. We also have recommendations and shoppable social media on the buyer side, which are solutions which we have kind of streamlined with visual recognition. We also have a few different problem statements that I work on. So my job's not really easy because I'm trying to deal with a team of 35 engineers, 14 machine learning PhDs, and explaining their business use cases. They're very academic in nature. We spun out of the National University of Singapore. And yes, so now we have a few different use cases where we are also looking at personalization when it comes to, personalized shoes for Adidas, for example, when they have to do color customization on their shoes. Or we're looking at more seller-side solutions when it comes to attributes tagging when it comes to e-commerce. We've also tried with media where we have a shoppable banner. You slide the image onto the banner, it does an instant search straight up and shows you solutions within the banner. So there are a few different use cases that we work on. Currently, we're a member of a team of about 60 people headquartered in Singapore. We've got offices in US, China, Dublin, and then we've got presence through partners in Brazil, Russia, Korea, and Middle East.
Thanks, Anmol. And the visual search problem is a fairly complex one, right? I remember hearing at Google once that the reason they identified image search was that when they were first beginning to scan the web, they wanted to focus on text. And so they had to have image recognition so that they could ignore the images. And then all of a sudden that became a center of interest in and of itself. And out of that, of course, many things have come, and there's a long way yet to go.
What's interesting is we also don't just do image search. This is reverse image search, so we actually understand what's within the image. If you go on Google and you look and you do a search, you have the web and then you go to images, you see relevant results. But if I like your denims and I want to buy a similar denims, I can take a picture and that'll identify the denim, the color, the attributes, whether it's a skin fit, it's a low waist, match a similar product from, say, for instance, something from Agoda. And eventually I can also shop the whole look. So if you want my look, if you think it's good enough, then you could pick the entire look, and then I can recommend shoes, denim, belts, jackets, everything.
I'm sure pretty soon it will be telling you that's actually not a good look for you.
We hope to reach that level of personalization.
Okay, and finally, Philippe.
Hi, my name is Philippe Runkin. I lead the implementation and development of solutions for IBM Watson across Asia. So we're focused across all industries, so whether that's healthcare or banking, which seems to be a large area now because of the level of engagement, certainly, or even heavy industries, who are caught in huge amounts of data that their engineers don't have time to interpret, and they're losing millions of dollars by making small mistakes in their responses. And I don't come from a tech background, actually. I come from law. I used to be a practicing lawyer and moved into large, complex account management. And I came into Watson about 3 years ago, primarily because there was a realization in IBM that AI first has to be consumable. So it can't be hyper-complex math. It's great, and you have the compute power to do it, but if you want it to become broad-based, it has to be consumable. So you go from having expert data scientists to the citizen data scientists. You can deploy AI by yourself. So partners, small companies, high school kids are now developing applications using AI components, right, from all providers. So that's the first part. Second was that if AI was going to make a difference, that we had to get people thinking about it, not in terms of the technology, but in terms of the users they were supporting and the problems they were trying to solve. And the greatest error we've seen in companies is when they get focused on the technology and say, I saw this great tool, I want to use it. Technology looking for a problem usually doesn't deliver value. And so that user-centric question is at the core of a good AI solution, and it has to be supported by good AI. And the last one, I think was alluded to earlier, is the last part was finding the partnership between human and machine. So it wasn't about, for us at IBM, about replacement of people, though at a task level that will certainly happen. But it's about how can we augment, right, people that are doing their jobs so we can unlock human potential. And I'll give you an example. So if you look at visual recognition in medicine, so a typical radiologist will have an 80-something+% success rate of identifying fractures in bones. AI will have maybe a 90% potential. Working together to get the 95 and 96. And that's the key. That you can, if you really focus on how you augment people, you will get a lot more out of the AI solution. And that's where we actually spend a lot of our time with our customers in defining that interaction. And based on that, you end up with actually very powerful solutions.
Thank you, Philippe. Idan and I have been talking to these gentlemen for a while to get ready for today's session. And one of the things, I think, in my very initial conversation with you, Philippe, was this question of how to get started. And my feeling about AI is that most of us have this kind of guilty conscience. Like, we know it's out there, we understand a little bit, we really need to understand more, we know it would be valuable, but we have not a good idea of how. And you talked about this, that sometimes your IBM Watson works with companies who feel like, okay, we need to get started. So could you maybe describe a particular case or an example of the kind of problems that you can help with?
Sure. So one of the mantras we have in our group is dream big, start small. Right? Have the view of where you want to go, at least a sense of it, but start small. Start something you can deploy quickly. We talked about the DevOps mentality, fail fast, fail. So the way we get to that starting point typically is using design thinking with our clients. So we deployed a whole bunch of companies to do that. But really the core of design thinking is to unlock the business challenge. And what challenges are going to be transformed by using AI? Because there's some business challenges that are really important that AI is not going to help you that much, and where the impact is. So if you go through that exercise, you'll typically find a good starting point that's, I call them steps of value. So the first one will have some deliver value on the first go, but it's something you can deliver 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months, really quick. So an example of that is we work with a credit card in Korea. So we went through a fairly exhaustive session with them to design where they wanted to start, and we started in a fairly straightforward chatbot space, and we deployed that in 3 months. And one of the things going through the process we did was spend a lot of time on design. So we don't need fancy technology, we need good design. And so they found out that they're in that design thinking process, which doesn't just look at a business need, but goes and asks users what works for them. It goes back and iterates ideas. So that's the really important part. So you can start with those processes to get started. They launched pretty quickly, and now we're on our 3rd use case with them already, that they said, okay, and the use case, the next step, and this is the important point in AI, that really usage is often. So through usage, you decide to find what's not working and where you can go.
I think that gets us onto the fundamental question of users and how AI interacts with users. So maybe Don would like to interject.
I just want to comment as well on that area. So I completely agree about starting small, and I think that relates also to the question of how to define AI. Do yourself a favor and define it in the most broad way, right? Saying every time I'm using data to make a decision, that's it. And the reason for that is to make it easy to start. If you think I need to have this deep learning, super complicated model in order to consider myself AI, you're just slowing yourself down. And also, you might have a person in your company that can do a very simple model, a regression, the average of that week. Sometimes it works. And that person might say, oh, but it's not AI, so that's not what I'm supposed to be doing for this problem, right? So taking a broad definition is actually useful to get solutions out faster. Now, if you ask me what you need to start, you need data, and that's not as easy as it sounds. Most companies spend a lot of time until they have data they actually trust, with the right set of monitoring, etc. And you need a way to test. Okay. Once you have these two, notice that I didn't say data science, I didn't say machine learning, algorithms, mathematicians, nothing. Once you have these two things, you can already start. Take the simplest, take 10 people, random people, say, how would you guess it works? Like, give me some estimate of how to use best data to get an answer here, and try those 10 outs, right? With time, you will iterate and you start to get people that can, implement a more complicated model, you start to onboard more tooling into it. But when it becomes a process where you prove value, step after step, you keep proving the value, then it makes sense to everyone. The biggest strategies that you have in this area are companies that went into these huge projects, and before they went into the step where you can actually see value, they ran out of gas, and everything was shut down. That's really a shame, in my opinion.
So start small. Yeah. Always, because when you start, you will make mistakes, right? And you will fail. So there might as well be small mistakes that you can recover from. In our preparatory discussions, we focused a lot on several questions. One of them, of course, is users and how to interact with users. And always lurking at the edges is this question of, are machines going to replace human beings? Are we going to become useless? And one of the more interesting little anecdotes came from Graham. The question is about something very fundamental, which is freedom. Human beings tend to like freedom and like choices. But we also know that if you have too many choices, it can be overwhelming. And Graham ran an experiment on this and learned something quite useful. So, Conrad, would you tell us about that?
So this was one of the earliest projects that we ran back in 2015. And we have a story around that somewhere out there on the internet. So at that time, we were just Grab taxi, right? And even until today, we do not know whether a taxi has a passenger in it. So the kind of method that we use to allocate bookings or jobs to the taxi drivers was through what we call bidding. So it's a misnomer, right? So we don't actually allow passengers or drivers to specify prices. Essentially, it's like, hey, here's a job, right? From Bukit Merah to Changi Airport, right? Which of you want it? And this job gets broadcasted to like 50 to 100 taxi drivers. And drivers, they really enjoy seeing these jobs on their phone, right? It's like, wow, imagine I can take on all these jobs, right? I'll be rich tonight. And they really enjoy it. But downside is, for passengers, it becomes kind of like slow for a passenger to be allocated a taxi driver. And so for us, the problem was kind of like obvious, right? Imagine if you can target this job better as drivers, then passengers will be able to get allocated taxi earlier. And so we went about building a model that actually kind of like segment the drivers and decide which are the ones, which are taxi drivers that actually, in fact, free to take on jobs, and which are the drivers that that like going from Bukit Merah to the airport for whatever reasons. And so it was quite successful. I mean, based on the data, right? Drivers were making more money, and passengers were allocated taxis faster. But to our surprise, and now the CEO came back and said, "Hey, Conway, drivers they're unhappy, right? They're telling me that they're seeing fewer jobs, and it's no longer as exciting as before, right?
So even though the jobs were better, right? In other words, they were jobs they were more likely to take and be able to fulfill. They weren't happy because they had less choice. The machine had come up with answers, really good answers that did not work for human beings.
Exactly.
So what did you do then?
Well, we shelved the project. And today, we give drivers even fewer choices. Now, I guess this is a very, very tough trade-off. And in this business, in transport, there are three parties: passengers, drivers, and us. And we are the middlemen that try to balance the preferences between passengers and drivers. So again, even though I said we have fewer choices, drivers, they actually realize the benefits of this more today as compared to previously. They now know that, hey, these are the jobs that I like. And we also rolled out a recent feature that allows drivers to specify, say like, hey, it's 5 p.m., right? I want to go back home to Tampines. Give me jobs, right, that I can take on that will send me. And this is where we apply some machine learning to match jobs to drivers, such that by 6 o'clock, right, they will have completed a few other jobs, and then they'll get home having eaten. And they love this.
That's good.
I think one maybe interesting way to see the relationship between users and AI is to take a step back and think, where did all of this start, right? And I don't know if many of you watched the show Mad Men. It's a good show. And it's about a marketing firm in New York. 50s and 60s. And around the end of the show, I won't tell you the punchline, but they bring up the idea of the computer, and they say, from now on, this thing will tell us how to spend the marketing budget. And for us, it makes a lot of sense that somebody like, CEO of a company or any officer of that level would need analysis, right? We need machines to help him get a decision. What if we start looking at our users as their own CEOs, right? So a user coming to Agoda wants to book a hotel. He's making a decision right now. We're trying to help him make that decision. So we want him to have the same level of analysis and thought through and understanding of his perspective to help him make that decision. And I think today the one thing that we are missing, and it's kind of an upcoming trend that I'm very excited about, is what is called as explainable AI. Okay, so, and this also comes to the point of the issue that was with Brad. I may show you less options, but the goal is not to hide things. Right? And you need to trust me that I'm showing you really what's relevant for you. There's nothing interesting out there. And the one thing that's going to help me do it, if I can explain to you why I chose these things, why they match you. Now, that's funny because it kind of conflicts with what Sharon was saying, because the trend is actually going the other way of building intuitive machines, right? So we need to see if we can counter that and have a machine introspecting the machine and kind of taking it to a psychological assessment. So why did you offer it, right? And I think these areas are very exciting. It should become sort of a conversation, right, between the user and the AI that says, I see that you're interested in that, so this is quite similar in this way, maybe you want this one, right? This kind of the things that we are going towards, and I think the user will have a much better experience overall when you reach that step.
Really interesting to talk about the explainable AI, because this is your point here. One of the projects that we are co-sponsoring right now is actually to help people find dates. And so it's actually a chatbot that actually can recommend people that would like to be happy to go out on a date with. I wonder if you want to know if the chatbot can explain why. It's not always easy. It's interesting point.
Really interesting. Only I think in Singapore would the government be helping you find dates.
No, they come from the angle of increasing the productivity rate.
I completely understand. I completely understand. Thinking about people again, I read an article a while ago that had this memorable line. It said the line between what is helpful and what is creepy is very fine and always moving. And this ties in also to the pervasive question that Yaron alluded to of privacy, right? What do we want to be known about us? What don't we? What are we accustomed to? What are we uncomfortable with? Maybe a couple of you would like to speak about that.
What we were talking about just before the start, and I think it goes into the conversation we were having, it is a balance of what is the utility to you, right? So if you look at your credit card company, Google, the amount of stuff they have on IMDA is huge. And we didn't notice it until it sort of came out in the press and we started seeing some very strange behavior. But as long as it was useful for us, we were okay with that. I have free email, I have free social networking, I have a bunch of free services that they get my knowledge, and hopefully I get some value back. But I think that line of creepiness happens when you don't think you're getting value anymore, and they're taking more than they're giving. So I think that's in design. It's not wrong taking information, you're open. But you've got to give something people say, yeah, this doesn't cross the line. That's how I would maybe define it, not so much from a technology standpoint. The information's out there, and now you're I'm finding like the TVs that monitor and say these home devices. And for us, it's like, you don't want to do that. Other people would find it incredibly interesting. And so they were okay with sharing this. So I think it's going to be very for each of us. We should have maybe as solutions developed, we should allow people to control how much they share.
Anyone would like to respond to that?
I think I agree. I think the value exchange needs to be defined, and once that is defined quite clearly, users are okay in sharing data. I think in today's time, privacy in data is something that doesn't exist because we've got, like you mentioned, credit card companies, they've got your details, medical companies, they've got your details. Sooner or later, things are being stitched up at some point. And if you look at GDPR, a little more specifically, points to be discussed are some of the things that GDPR highlights is what data is being stored and is it operating data, and basically does the user know the intended use of this data, and is the company using it only for that intended use, or is there anything else? For that, as you mentioned, there's explainable AI which is coming out in a big way, where you can actually let the user know why is something being used and what is it being used for. And once that is done and the value exchange is something which is very obvious to the user, there wouldn't be a situation where we would be debating the use of data.
Yes, please.
So there was, I think, Mary Meeker's slides where she said that the balance between data privacy and benefits, like more Chinese were willing to trade their data than Americans. So 24% of Chinese were willing to trade versus Americans. So do you think that that will give Asian companies data advantage in innovations, considering that we are less sensitive about data privacy there?
Do you mind just repeating the question, just in case anybody didn't hear it?
So the question was sort of differences between different countries. So in Asia, during a survey, Chinese respondents said 34% more likely to say it's okay to share data if I get benefits, whereas Americans were about 24%. And would that difference give Asian companies benefit? I think the benefit would come to companies who are operating in those markets. So those markets might get more benefits. You could have a Google operating in Asia that gets the benefit of that. It doesn't have to be an Asian company, for sure. But sometimes the surveys are a bit dubious sometimes, because I think Americans share a lot more data than they think about, and they want the services. So people say, oh, I don't want to share my data, but I do want Facebook and I don't want Facebook. Right? So people want the service. So maybe it's about transparency and explainability. And I think companies who can bridge that gap and tell you what they're doing with their data with third parties are going to really be the success stories.
Yeah, I think if we get to the level where the differences in the product between in an Asian product and non-Asian are big because of those 34 versus 24, it's quite sad. We need to understand why we have only 24 and 34 and how can we improve, right? Similarly, like today, when you go to a website, you get these cookies banner. We use cookies, right? You know what happens when you don't use cookies? The internet doesn't work, right? Like, it's just a joke. Like, it can't really work without this tool. And the same goes for people that disable JavaScript. All these kind of small, like tiny fractions of people like actually have a problem like with these things. And we need to get to a position where the public trusts the companies and there are enough mechanisms of control that everybody understands that's fine and they feel protected, right? And then we can really have the best product for our customers without feeling like we are on some kind of balance sheet, which I think is where we are going, and I think we're getting.
Let me talk about GDPR. Let me interject another slightly controversial topic. I spend a lot of time thinking about proper relationship among governments, companies, and citizens. And this is one area where the question has been coming up very, very conspicuously. And it's not clear to me that there's any single right answer. I don't know that governments are always the very best arbiters of technological decisions, for example, because they don't always have the expertise. But how do you and your organizations think about this question of how to make the right choices and who should make those decisions? William, you're in a good position to think about this.
I won't like my answer, but I mean, it's obviously a very difficult question to answer. We don't have the answer right now. That's the reason why recently Singapore government just announced a special council to look into the ethical use of AI They even give grant to SMU, right, to spend some time, study this, right, to help the government make the right decision. On our side, AI Singapore focuses mostly on the technology side. We are actually promoting research in the area of privacy preserving AI. So I think it probably won't solve all the problems. It will probably work very well with the frameworks that hopefully SME and council come up with. We don't have the answer, but we know it's important because we're going to study it.
You look like you have a contribution.
Yeah, I think policies will keep coming up as we move along. So this is a new area of technology, and that's an ongoing process where these things keep coming up and the policies around it will start being framed. But as businesses, what would be a better idea is to look at what sort of value are you adding to your customer, and then look at the data points that you could secure more easily. Let's not worry about crossing the line and trying to get personal data. Only personal data is going to help you, make any changes to my processes. Not really. You can use sample data to try and start small, as we mentioned earlier, and look at how you're going to make use of AI to improve your processes and create new value for customers. Until then, there will be situations like this which we will come across, and there will be another wave of regulations apart from GDPR in other parts of the world which will come through. This is an ongoing process.
I think there are two strains in this discussion. One is this question of regulations. I think what works for companies at least is to understand the interest. Right? What is trying to be saved or protected? So, and when you start thinking about that, then you start developing solutions. So, for example, in personal information, that concern companies had about saying, I don't want personal information going across borders and the sovereignty issue, whatever your thoughts are on it. What they really want to do is give some protection to people and want companies to take an active role. So that includes the development of masking technologies and masking code. You don't need that personal information to drive an AI decision. You need the intent of the person's communication. So that develops, so I think companies, it's incumbent on us to develop stuff to address interests, number one. And for governments, I think Singapore government did a great job in addressing AI by making the country more AI fluent and capable. So that work in Singapore where they're driving skills for skills future and all these programs is saying you can't just regulate AI, you have to be part of the program. And so I think that's the other side of regulation and good policies how to prepare for it.
There's a question, yes.
Is it okay if I ask more of a futuristic question?
Sure.
Yeah. We talk a lot about maybe like the specific AI, but I'm more like a future comic nerd. I'd like to ask about general intelligence for artificial intelligence, right? Like where exactly are we at in the general intelligence field? And realistically, are we kind of maybe 50 years ahead, or maybe sooner because of all the technologies that we're having right now for general intelligence for AI?
Take that from an academic perspective.
Actually, not from an academic perspective. I mean, from the proposals that I'm receiving so far, we're pretty far from it right now. So far, it's been mostly, applying deep learning to process information and all that. I would really love to see more works in this age.
I think I like the question. It's all speculation, right? Obviously, and also we need to understand that what we call intelligence is not one thing. Okay, so our brain has few very well designed things that it can do, and it has something that it's bad, right? So like if I can solve a addition of two numbers faster than a human, am I general intelligence because of it, right? Because obviously every calculator does that much better than a human, but still we don't consider it to be intelligence, right? So the human intelligence is broken up to pieces. Now, one of those pieces are the visual cortex, and those areas we are getting quite good. I think in recent numbers we can go beyond human ability to analyze a picture, right? Not necessarily a video, but a picture. So in some areas, yes. In the area of open conversation, I think there was a very impressive presentation by Google just not so long ago. I'm a quite skeptic in this area. When we discuss, when we talk, we get so many different things into it. Our intuition about the world, about the physical world, about history, things happen that's happening. It takes us years to make a person go to that. And honestly, I'm not sure that it's important. We have like 7 billion people now. Why do we need more, right? Like, why do we need to make them build more? I think that we have tasks that we want to accomplish, and we want to get rid of the things that don't use the humanity. Right? We want to take the places where we treat people effectively as machines, give them this, and this. And this might include some, okay, look at this picture and see, and so on and so on. But effectively, they are being scripted. We want to get rid of all that stuff so we can still be the humans. Okay, we're not trying to replace being humans. And so for me, like, I hope never, in a sense, right? I hope never, but I assume that, you know, as things are always progressing, we will go through that. But I would take the higher estimation of time, both because it's very hard, and also because it's not very compelling. There's not an immediate value coming out of it. So companies are not rushing like they do for other people.
Maybe I always love questions about the future of AI because it brings to mind all the questions I'm asking about the same question myself, right? I think we're still very, very far away from what you will see in Blade Runner, the 1984 version, where Harrison Ford was effectively conducting the Turing test on the Android, right? If you think about the kind of neural networks that we have today, every neuron essentially is doing a W transpose multiplied by X, right? A very simple algebraic operation, right? That is not the neuron that we have in the cortex, right? The neuron is essentially a biological cell, and in every biological cell, well, in the case of human beings, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? And whatever that this human being can do in life, right, subjected to what he experiences, right, it's all determined by these 23 pairs of chromosomes. And that's not where we are getting to yet today. Right? Think about when a baby is born, or even from a point, right, where the baby is just a single cell, and how it multiplies itself. When it's born, right, it sees the world, okay, goes through pain, joy, and all kinds of experiences, visual input, audio, touch, and everything. How are we able to replicate all this data, right, from a machine and train it to be as capable as a human being that grows up in life? I think that's going to be tremendously difficult. And also, today, computers process data as binary digits, right? 0 and 1. That's not the way our human brains process information, right? There's probably a theoretical limit to how much machines can do because of choice of processing data in binary. Again, in human beings, it is how we make decisions is based on how neurons fire, and that information is not binary. Right? It's through signals which are essentially analog, and that's something that I think we need to get to one day if we really want to, get to the point where we have, someone like Harrison Ford having to do a Turing test to determine whether the Android is human or machine.
Billy.
Yeah, to the point earlier, I actually agree that I'm not sure how valuable general intelligence is, and in fact, I think this focus on even the Turing test holds us back, right? Rather than focus on what we need to get done and how to accomplish it. Because if we were focused on the Turing test, we wouldn't have gone towards quantum computing and where we are today. Okay, that's far beyond the humans will ever do in terms of what it can accomplish and where it's going, or the speed at which we upload and scan and understand images, right? Recently, I think the record now is in under 40 minutes, it's 7.5 million images can be processed at 35% accuracy recognition.
amazing speed. So I would, rather than focus on general intelligence, I'd really focus on sort of applied intelligence. I think that's what we should do.
Another question? Yes. Neil.
Could you address a little bit about the issue of diversity and that artificial intelligence, the burden of the efficacy of artificial intelligence is going to be on the companies that are developing AI. And that diversity is not just ageism or ethnicity, but cultures and traditions and religion, and that everything that's talked about the disruption of AI is, you were saying, as far as this is human and element, but that there seems to be, and this has been addressed, there's nothing new about this, but I'd like you to just maybe touch upon that burden, if I call it a burden, for companies that are developing artificial intelligence, and how well or how not well they're doing, and how they're addressing some of those long-term and short-term issues to see whether, how not just how impactful this will be, but this is uncharted territory too. And we can talk about the architecture, the infrastructure, but at the end of it, this is humans, and this is that gap of how it's being implemented and how that diversity, with the capital D and the small d, is being addressed.
So one of the things that IBM identified as the big challenges in the next 5 years is bias and data. Right? So how do we remove bias from data? And that's almost the point of diversity. Diversity, in a way, is our own personal biases culturally or from our experiences. So AI, in some ways, is trying to move away from that. So let me just look at data without any bias. But for AI to be successful, I think where diversity comes in is the solutions that are developed, are they catered culturally sensitive? Do they pick up on the subtleties of our society? So for example, in Malaysia, we worked with a Malaysian bank who went live, and they realized that there were certain terms that if you talked about them or mentioned them in the questions can really set off what they call creative Instagram mode. Quite a good topic. So imagine if you're in Malaysia and somebody writes, and it's a fairly stable society that's really multicultural, but manages how people talk about multicultural. And so if someone had typed in, oh, what is a good credit card for savings? And the answer comes back, hey, get this card. It's good for you. It's a good credit card for. It comes up with a general answer. Takes a picture and says, this bank thinks this card is great for savings. Right? And those religious topics. So we have to build with the bank ways to go and address that kind of cultural sensitivity, which we haven't seen anywhere else in other countries. So I think diversity we handle in solutions, but AI should drive to the enterprise.
I think that's a good point. Brings out an example in my mind, talking about Malaysia again. I think one of the applications of visual recognition that we are beta testing is also brand safety. So far, brand safety has been largely semantic in nature, and how do we define brand safety when it comes to different regions? So in the US, if I have to look at IMDA as a model, which we already have ready, certain levels are acceptable over there for advertising, whereas more sensitive countries like Malaysia may not be as sensitive. So those factors can be deployed at a use case level, as mentioned earlier. But in general, AI is supposed to be biased. It just has to tell you whether this is classified as nudity or not. Now I can change the confidence levels at the back, knowing what other business logic, cultural logic I need to put in place to get the desired outcome.
So, a couple of things. First of all, let's remember that in most cases, AI is replacing something that is already being done to some extent, and mostly by human decision. Right? And human decision, when having a lot of data coming in, what humans do, they tend to refer to their intuition, which I would say is the most biased tool on earth. Okay, so I think first off, even though there are risks that you mentioned, I think just by not trying to get ourselves to get some guesstimate based on a lot of data that we cannot consume anyway, we just comes out as biases eventually. I think letting the machines do the big processing and come to the right decision for the customer is generally better. Now, how we look at it generally, if I'm helping people to fix a flat tire, right? What do I need to know about the person that just kind of went to the side of the road, the car is cannot move and has a flat tire? I need to know maybe the car model. I need to know, what kind of tires they want, and I can help them by understanding the problem they have. And I might learn from previous cases where I help people with similar cars, but I don't need to know, what is the gender of this person. Right. So for us, at least, being an e-commerce company, we are not about who you are. We don't care. We don't want to know. We want to know what you are trying to do. We're trying to help you with a task. And we are learning from other people that have a similar task as you. And so it's all about the behavior. What kind of traveler are you today? And not who you are. Tell me your, inner secrets. For that stuff, we don't even want, they're not helpful in our mind, and we don't even want to know. So, well, the value, it all goes back to the value proposition, right? For us, the value is quite direct, because we get you, when we prove to you that this is the best place for you to book your property, then you will use us more, then our company, gains. We don't need this kind of second circle where we get, okay, we can identify your actual people, and then we can sell that data to a marketer somewhere. We are, in a way, in easier position for us to avoid these kind of issues.
I think you pointed out something quite important, which begins to solve some of those problems. You focus on behavior rather than identity. Things get easier. For one thing you said, for example, Idan, what kind of customer are you today, right? So John, when he's making a business trip, may be one kind of a customer on a travel site. If he's traveling with a family, maybe quite a different kind of customer. And the question is, what does he need right now? And that will influence how he acts. And if we try to solve that problem rather than say, well, John is such and such a person with these characteristics, and therefore we want to make a whole bunch of assumptions about him, we stay out of a lot of messy problems, which are the ones I think that people are most protective of. Shall we move on to drinks? I know at least one person in the audience who indicated a real interest in the topic. So let's do this. We're not stopping the questions at all. We are simply shifting the location. And the plan is then that we will have maybe just about 40 minutes of interaction with, at each, there are a bunch of tables over here, each with a question on it. How can I use AI in my organization, and so on. We have one or two people there, some of our experts, but also some data scientists from Agoda, who will be standing there, who will be serving drinks. Do that for a while, and then we'll move on to, I shouldn't call it the mega event, but certainly the big show with our celebrity chef and so on. So let's move on to phase 2, and we'll continue the conversation on a one-to-one basis. All right? Thanks for that.